I have a little bit of a drive, so I figured there was a few things on my mind related to coding I wanted to touch base on. I wanted to make some videos on it, but I haven't had a chance. So there's like 3 things on my mind related to code that I wanted to talk about. The first one is when you run into bugs, right? So a lot of times, like, I'm working on a really big project, and it's kind of insane that you can, after you work for so long on some code, it becomes really difficult to read your own code. And I found that, like, really, like, I don't care what anybody says, that you could sit there and you could comment out stuff. You could comment, you could leave comments, you could be as abstract your code, as sophisticated as you want to. If you are working on a really intricate project that requires engineering, right? It's not just like simple little one fetch, there's things that require, code to talk to each other. Things have to be intertwined. When things happen, other things have to happen. And every time you go in and out of a project like that, it becomes really difficult, right? Like, I know that when I open up a project, a real project, I need like at least an hour that is going to be just sifting back through everything, figuring out again where everything went. And I still don't have a really good answer for that. I find that quite difficult. If anyone does, I would love to hear more. But over all these years of coding, I haven't found a really easy way. You just have to get in and out of the code. Just in and out of code, especially a big project, takes time. So you have to sift through everything. That's one general problem I've seen. The other problem that I've seen, which is fine, you just have to leave yourself ample time for that. So if you're going to work on something, you need an hour of not just working on the problem, of just getting in and out of the code, understanding it. The second thing is, when you're working on something so abstract, when you're working on like a really big project and there's a lot going on, you run into bugs, right? Inevitably, you run into bugs regardless of what it is. If you're coding, you're trying to figure something out. Excuse me. And it's really difficult. So what I've done, what's worked for me is, like, say you're like at one of the projects, I was trying to, implement something, and then like the state just wasn't updating in the project, and I didn't know why. And there's just so many different states and objects and so many different fetches going on. It's hard to play around with it without messing up and fumbling your code. You can make another branch potentially and do that, but I find that can be too much. So sometimes what I've found is, again, that's probably a good idea, but I just find making another branch, sometimes it's too much. It's not necessary. And then if you want to, like, you could go to another branch and then play with it, but you might find yourself like fumbling too much and refactoring too much. But if you are successful, you could then merge that into your main branch. But the problem is, if you make a new branch and you're not successful, you just have this hodgepodge, which is fine. Maybe that's something to play with. But I found an easier technique has been to actually simplify the concept of what you're trying to do as small as possible, and make a new little, like, Create React app or NextJS app, make a simplified I just literally open up a clean app and I recreate. It sounds like a lot, but it actually isn't. I recreate the concept, like, okay, here's one fetch, here's the state that I'm trying to pull. I just mimic the same concept. It seems like a lot, but it actually isn't. And then I play with that, and then I'm like, I have no other code, none of the other abstractions, none of the other functions in that. It's just that one thing I'm trying to test, the one fetch with the state, with the whatever problem that's happening, and I play with that. That's how I've been able to solve problems. I just mimic the thing that's giving me the bug. I recreate into another simplified app, and I play with it there, because all the other function throws me off. I find that's been successful for me. So that's something you can do. If you find something real difficult, you can abstract it out and just simplify it and put it in like a clean little app and just play with it back and forth. This way you keep your code clean. And I'm sure there's other better ways, but that's been easy for me. That's been that's been the best thing for me. Finally, I found that another thing is, I found it really difficult. I find it generally difficult to read other people's code, right? And I think that's something common. I think in a lot of, I think people think if they don't know how to read the code that they're amateurs. But the truth is, I find it no matter how many years of experience, no matter how senior you are, sifting through someone else's code is just like, I don't know. It's almost like using. It's almost like using a different vehicle that you just completely don't understand. Even though it could be the same code base, but what I've realized is that engineering something is engineering something, right? So someone might engineer. There's not one way to do something, and that's why I think a lot of people think that if I don't get this code, I'm an amateur. No, it needs explanation. The way it's engineered needs to be understood, because something might be here, something might be affected, and you can sit there and look through all of it, but it'll take you a really long time to figure, and you can eventually. That's the idea, is that if you look through someone else's code, maybe over time, but generally, it's common that it's going to be very difficult. So that's normal. I like looking through other people's code. It's just no developer likes to touch someone else's code, because they know how they engineered something. They tuck something here, they put something there. This function does it this way, and that's common. So I wouldn't fret if you have a difficulty understanding, and if you're junior and you don't fully understand someone's code. That's normal. Finally, the last thing I want to touch on was another issue that I've stumbled on is I find it when you're making fetch calls that require, API like authorizations and things like that, keys, right? They need to be passed. But then what happens when you run into a bug, when you're trying to fetch and you need to look at the call? You need to have the call available somehow in a clean way, so that you can always look at the call without having to do the authorization headers. I mean, you can use, Postman, I guess. Some people use that, maybe to plug in the API call. But what if you're local, too? That's like another issue. But you definitely need a place or a way to make the call so you can see it when you need to debug things without having to look through the code and console log everything. You just need a clean way to see what is being pulled from this fetch, from this, this endpoint. What is coming back without all the function, without all the authorization headers. So I would find a way to make the fetch call, maybe allow it to pass some query string or some parameter in the URL that just opens things up so you can see it, just temporarily or just locally, really, just so you can keep looking at the call to debug things. Because not being able to, look at the call is a problem. Like, it's just, you can't console log everything. You can't always count on the authorization headers. It's just like you're going in blind. So that's one tip I wanted to leave you guys today, is definitely just being able to do that, is leaving the endpoint URL open somehow, although obviously it has to be closed, but at least locally having some secretive way to allow the fetch to open so you can see the JSON. Otherwise, it's just a nightmare when you're coding a really big project and you're constantly fetching and you're like, well, what's being returned? What's coming back? And then you have to debug things, and you have to constantly console log, and you have to constantly break your code and comment things out and refactor things. It's just worse. It's just have a way to do that, whether that's Postman or whether that's your own way, locally, where you write some function where it's like, okay, if this query secret API key comes in, just allow these query strings to come through and show the JSON. That's just like another way I found it. These are just things that people don't talk about, that software engineers don't discuss. Some of these difficult things, no matter how senior you are, like, these are super common things that everyone feels. And I know I've, had like a lot of conversation with junior engineers, and they're like happy to hear like these are all issues. All the things that junior engineers face are all things senior engineers face. Now, senior engineers, I think they find little hacks and techniques, and over time you over and what to sort of do, like what little things you can do to make your life vlog that's live, is that it is really challenging. Like, I've been at it for I mean, I don't know what career in the world, you constantly reinvent yourself. You have to constantly learn, your skill set. You just have to constantly, it's just a very difficult career. I'm sure, like, and I really, maybe there's some careers where you're only doing that one thing. Maybe if, I mean, I've never worked for a FANG, so I don't know whether like these guys are like just, you know, from some friends say like, you know, they're only working on this like little minute thing, you know, and they sometimes they get bored. I mean, I guess if that's the case, but then how will you grow, right? Like, how can you grow your career if you're only working on some minute thing and then that's it? It might feel fun, it might be easy, but you can't grow. But if you're like a real coder trying to grow your career, you're constantly learning. You're constantly learning difficult things. And then languages are constantly changing, frameworks are constantly changing, and even the framework itself is being updated. I mean, just when React 18 came out, people were like, the double render of React just broke a lot of apps. It's just like another thing you had to, oh God, like, well, why does this happen? You know, it's just, and that's normal. And I think it's just a safe place for coders to know, like, yes, it's hard. You know, it's difficult. This stuff happens to all of us. And just take your time and be patient. And I think that's all I have for my live today. I hope you, I don't know who's on. I can't see any of the comments, but if you happen to catch this, I'm on the road and I have like a long trip, but I have a couple of videos coming out soon. I want to do. I'm working on a few things. I'm working on a really big e-commerce application, so I want to demonstrate some ways to like add to cart with NextJS. I found that pretty. I think people find it somewhat difficult at times, but there's some things I'm going to do and demonstrate some things that I've seen in the app that I'm going to just do some videos on. So, all right, I'll see you guys there. If you catch this, please leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me see how to end this. Well.